It was a quiet morning in Carmel by the Sea, California, the kind of morning where the air feels crisp and calm. The sun peeked over the hills, casting long shadows across Clint Eastwood's sprawling estate. For decades, Eastwood had been a household name, a man whose face was synonymous with grit, determination, and an unshakable sense of justice. He wasn't just an actor or director. He was a symbol of resilience, someone who stood tall no matter what life threw at him. But on this particular day, that image of invincibility started to crack. The sound of car doors slamming broke the tranquility. Neighbors peeked out their windows as several black SUVs pulled up outside Eastwood's property. Federal agents stepped out, dressed in suits, their faces serious. It wasn't every day you saw law enforcement showing up at the doorstep of one of Hollywood's biggest legends. Reporters who'd been tipped off about something big happening were already gathering nearby, cameras ready to capture whatever unfolded next. Clint Eastwood answered the door himself. At 93 years old, he still carried himself with the same quiet confidence that made audiences fall in love with him decades ago. Dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt, he looked more like a retired rancher than a global superstar. When he saw the agents standing there, his expression didn't change much. If anything, it hardened slightly, like he'd expected trouble but hoped it wouldn't come knocking today. One of the agents handed him a piece of paper, an arrest warrant. The charges, allegedly failing to comply with financial disclosures, tied to a charity he once supported. Specifically, it involved a veterans foundation that had raised millions of dollars, but was now under scrutiny for mismanagement. According to court documents, Eastwood hadn't provided proper oversight, and some of the funds meant for veterans seemed to have disappeared without explanation. For a moment, everything went silent. Eastwood held the paper in his hand, scanning it briefly before looking back at the agents. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. His voice was soft but firm, carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades commanding attention on screen and off. Despite his frustration, he didn't resist. Instead, he cooperated quietly, allowing the agents to guide him through the process. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, flashes erupted from behind bushes and fences. Paparazzi had managed to sneak close enough to snap photos of the surreal scene. There in plain sight was Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry, the man with no name, the guy who'd stared down bad guys on screen countless times, now walking to a police car like any other suspect. Fans watching the news later couldn't believe their eyes. How could someone so larger than life end up in such a situation? The story quickly spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with reactions ranging from shock to disbelief. Some people defended Eastwood, pointing out his lifelong support for military causes and wondering why he was being singled out. Others questioned whether fame gave him a free pass for too long. Meanwhile, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi found herself at the center of the storm. She was the one who issued the warrant, a move that caught everyone by surprise, including the judge overseeing the case. During the initial hearing, the judge expressed confusion over the sudden escalation. "This is unprecedented," they said, shaking their head. After all, Eastwood wasn't exactly a young man anymore. At 93, he'd lived a full life filled with achievements most could only dream of. Was this really the time to drag him into legal battles over events that happened years ago? Still, Bondi stood her ground, arguing that accountability shouldn't have an expiration date. Eastwood's lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, wasted no time jumping into action. Known for taking on high-profile cases, Dershowitz argued passionately for bail, emphasizing Eastwood's age and health. He also pointed out that Eastwood posed no flight risk. He had deep roots in the community and a reputation to protect. In the end, the judge agreed to release him on house arrest, though with strict conditions. Eastwood would need to check in regularly with probation officers and stay within the confines of his estate. When Eastwood finally walked out of the courthouse, reporters shouted questions from every direction. Cameras flashed nonstop, capturing every step he took. But instead of lashing out or showing anger, Eastwood kept his composure. As he reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, he paused for a moment, turning toward the crowd. With a faint smile, he said simply, I'll prove my innocence. And just like that, the curtain closed on the first act of what promised to be a dramatic saga. For Clint Eastwood, this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight to preserve his legacy, a chance to show the world that even heroes can stumble without losing their essence. Little did anyone know, the real drama was only beginning. The arrest warrant had shaken Clint Eastwood's world, but it didn't stop there. As the news spread, people began digging deeper into the allegations against him. What started as a legal hiccup quickly turned into a full-blown examination of his life and career. For someone who'd always been seen as a symbol of strength and integrity, this was unfamiliar territory. At the heart of the controversy was a charity Eastwood had championed years ago, a foundation meant to support veterans. It sounded noble enough. Veterans were close to Eastwood's heart. He often spoke about their sacrifices and how much they deserved respect and care. The foundation raised millions of dollars, money that was supposed to go toward helping those who served their country. But somewhere along the way, things went wrong. Critics claimed the funds weren't used properly. Some pointed to missing paperwork, while others accused the organization of mismanaging donations. According to investigators, Eastwood hadn't ensured transparency when it came to the charity's finances. He may not have been directly involved in day-to-day operations, but his name carried weight. And now, that same name was being dragged through the mud. Eastwood insisted he was innocent. Through his lawyers, he explained that he'd stepped away from active involvement in the charity years ago. "I trusted the people running it," he reportedly said during private conversations. "I never thought they'd let me or anyone down." Still, trust alone wasn't enough to satisfy prosecutors. They argued that stepping back didn't absolve him of responsibility. If anything, it made him look careless. As details emerged, public opinion became divided. On one side, fans rallied behind Eastwood, refusing to believe he could intentionally do something unethical. Many pointed out his decades-long dedication to military causes. Hadn't he directed movies like Flags of Our Fathers and American Sniper, films that honored soldiers and their struggles? Didn't he use his platform to raise awareness about issues affecting veterans? To them, this felt like an unfair attack on a man who'd given so much. On the other side, critics saw an opportunity to hold Eastwood accountable. Fame, they argued, shouldn't shield anyone from scrutiny. If ordinary people faced consequences for negligence, why should a celebrity get special treatment? Social media exploded with debates. Memes circulated showing Eastwood delivering one of his classic lines. "Go ahead, make my day." Late-night comedians joked about the irony of Dirty Harry getting arrested. Laughter aside, though, there was an underlying tension. People wondered if this was really about justice or something else entirely. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi found herself at the center of the storm. Her decision to issue the arrest warrant surprised everyone, including her own team. Bondi defended her actions, saying she believed in holding powerful figures accountable no matter who they were. "No one is above the law," she declared in interviews. But not everyone bought it. Skeptics suggested her timing might not be coincidental. With rumors swirling about a potential Senate run, some speculated she was using the case to boost her profile. Was this about doing the right thing or scoring political points? Meanwhile, Eastwood's supporters grew increasingly frustrated. They accused Bondi of targeting him unfairly, arguing that lesser-known individuals wouldn't face such aggressive prosecution. Others questioned whether the investigation was thorough enough. Had all leads been followed? Were other board members scrutinized as closely as Eastwood? These questions hung in the air, fueling conspiracy theories and adding layers of complexity to an already messy situation. For Eastwood himself, the ordeal was deeply personal. He'd spent his entire life building a reputation, not just as an actor or director, but as someone who stood for values like honesty, hard work, and loyalty. Now, that reputation was under attack. Friends close to him described him as hurt and disappointed, though he rarely showed it publicly. Instead, he focused on proving his innocence, working tirelessly with his legal team to gather evidence and prepare for court. Behind closed doors, Eastwood reflected on the irony of it all. Here he was, a man who'd portrayed tough, morally upright characters on screen, now facing accusations of wrongdoing in real life. It was almost poetic in a cruel way. Yet despite the pressure, he remained calm. Those who knew him well said he approached the situation like he did everything else with quiet determination. He wasn't going to let this break him. The media played a huge role in shaping public perception. Documentaries popped up examining Eastwood's career, framing the scandal as either a tragic fall from grace or a long overdue reckoning. Talk shows debated whether fame insulated individuals from consequences or made them more vulnerable to public shaming. Even celebrities weighed in, with some defending Eastwood as a victim of bureaucracy and others urging accountability regardless of status. Through it all, one thing was clear. This case wasn't just about money or paperwork, it was about legacy. Could Clint Eastwood weather this storm without losing the respect he'd earned over decades? Or would this mark the beginning of the end for the icon? As the trial loomed closer, tensions mounted. Both sides prepared their arguments, knowing the stakes couldn't be higher. For Eastwood, it wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about preserving the image he'd worked so hard to create. For Bondi, it was about proving that even the most untouchable figures could be held accountable. And for the public, it was about figuring out where truth ended and speculation began. In the weeks leading up to the courtroom showdown, one question lingered in everyone's mind. Would Clint Eastwood emerge victorious, reaffirming his place as a hero both on and off screen? Or would this chapter rewrite his story forever? Only time would tell. The morning of the arrest was unlike any other in Clint Eastwood's life. For someone who had spent decades portraying characters who always seemed to be in control, this moment felt surreal and deeply unsettling. It wasn't just the handcuffs or the flashing cameras that made it so. It was the sheer weight of seeing his carefully built image shaken to its core. Federal agents arrived at Eastwood's estate early, their SUVs rolling up the driveway with a quiet authority that spoke volumes. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering to each other as they watched the scene unfold. Reporters stationed nearby scrambled to get closer, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. The air buzzed with anticipation, like everyone knew they were witnessing something monumental. When Eastwood opened the door, he didn't look surprised, just resigned. Maybe he'd seen this coming. Or maybe, after living for over 9 decades, he'd learned to take things as they came. Dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt, he looked more like a man ready for a day of gardening than someone about to face arrest. His face remained calm, almost stoic, betraying none of the emotions churning beneath the surface. One of the agents handed him the warrant, explaining the charges. Eastwood took it without saying much, glancing over the document briefly before handing it back. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, his voice low but steady. Those 3 words carried a lifetime of frustration. Here was a man who'd faced countless challenges on screen and off, yet this felt different. This wasn't a script he could rewrite or a role he could step away from. This was real life, and it wasn't playing by his rules. As the agents guided him outside, paparazzi swarmed like bees around a hive. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing every movement. There was Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor, director, and icon, being led to a police car in handcuffs. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. This was the same man who'd played tough-as-nails characters who never backed down, who always found a way to come out on top. Now, here he was, walking toward a vehicle that symbolized vulnerability rather than power. Eastwood didn't resist. He cooperated quietly, keeping his head high despite the chaos surrounding him. Some might have expected anger or defiance, but instead, he exuded a quiet dignity. Perhaps it was pride, or maybe it was simply the knowledge that losing his temper wouldn't change anything. Whatever it was, it left an impression. Even those skeptical of his innocence couldn't help but admire his composure in such a difficult situation. The ride to the courthouse was silent. Eastwood sat in the back seat of the police car, staring out the window as familiar landmarks passed by. Each mile seemed heavier than the last, carrying not just the physical distance but the emotional toll of the day. He likely replayed moments from his past in his mind, scenes from movies, memories of achievements, glimpses of a life well lived. And now, this. A chapter he never imagined writing. At the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as he stepped out of the car. Cameras flashed nonstop, creating a blinding storm of light and noise. Eastwood ignored them, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other. His lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, stood waiting, ready to defend him against accusations that threatened to tarnish his legacy. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. Gone was the frenzy of the media circus. In its place was a tense, formal setting where decisions would shape the future. Eastwood sat quietly beside Dershowitz, listening intently as the judge reviewed the case. The prosecution argued that his failure to ensure transparency in the charity's finances amounted to negligence. They painted a picture of someone who'd turned a blind eye to wrongdoing, someone who should have known better. Dershowitz countered passionately, emphasizing Eastwood's age and health. He pointed out that his client posed no flight risk and had deep ties to the community. "This is a man who has dedicated his life to service," Dershowitz said, his voice firm. "To suggest otherwise is unfair and unjust." The courtroom fell silent as he spoke, his words resonating with those present. The judge listened carefully, weighing both sides before making a decision. In the end, bail was granted, but with strict conditions. Eastwood would remain under house arrest, confined to his estate, and required to check in regularly with probation officers. It was a compromise, but it still stung. For someone used to freedom and independence, being restricted felt like another blow to his pride. As Eastwood walked out of the courthouse later that day, reporters shouted questions once again. This time, though, he stopped for a moment. Standing at the bottom of the steps, he turned to face the crowd. With a faint smile, he said simply, "I'll prove my innocence." Just 4 words, but they carried the weight of a promise, a vow, to fight back against the accusations threatening to overshadow everything he'd worked for. For Eastwood, this wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about proving that even heroes can stumble without losing their essence. It was about showing the world that resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, no matter how hard the fall. As he climbed into a waiting car and drove away, the media circus continued to swirl. But Eastwood seemed unfazed. He'd faced adversity before, both on screen and off, and he wasn't about to let this define him. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, determined to reclaim the narrative and restore trust in his legacy. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test not only Eastwood's resolve but also the public's perception of justice, accountability, and redemption. With the arrest behind him and the trial looming ahead, Clint Eastwood found himself in uncharted territory. For a man who had always been known for his quiet confidence and ability to stay calm under pressure, this was different. The stakes were higher than ever before, not just legally but personally. Every piece of evidence uncovered had the potential to either vindicate him or tarnish his legacy forever. And as both sides dug deeper into the case, it became clear that nothing about this investigation was black and white. The prosecution's team worked tirelessly to build their case against Eastwood. They combed through years of financial records tied to the veterans' charity he once championed. Emails, bank statements, meeting notes. Everything was scrutinized for any sign of wrongdoing. What they found painted a complicated picture. There were emails suggesting Eastwood had been warned about discrepancies in how funds were being managed. These warnings came from people within the organization, individuals who claimed they'd tried to alert him but received little response. Prosecutors seized on these communications, arguing that Eastwood's silence amounted to negligence. He knew there were issues, one prosecutor told reporters during a press briefing. And yet he chose to do nothing. But Eastwood's defense team wasn't backing down. Led by Alan Dershowitz, they argued that the prosecution was taking things out of context. Yes, Eastwood had received those emails, but according to his lawyers, he trusted the people running the charity to handle the details. After all, He hadn't been involved in its day-to-day operations for years. You don't accuse someone of negligence just because they delegated responsibility, Dershowitz said during an interview. That's not how leadership works. To bolster their argument, Eastwood's team began targeting other members of the charity's board. They pointed fingers at individuals who had more direct control over finances and decision-making. One former executive, in particular, became a focal point. Documents revealed that this person had authorized questionable expenditures, including lavish trips and expensive gifts paid for with donor money. Eastwood's lawyers argued that if anyone deserved blame, it was this individual, not their client. As the legal battle intensified, so did public interest. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Documentaries popped up left and right, each offering its own take on what really happened. Some portrayed Eastwood as a victim of circumstance, a well-meaning figurehead caught in a web of bureaucracy and mismanagement. Others suggested he was guilty of turning a blind eye, using his fame to avoid accountability. Late-night comedians continued to joke about the situation, imagining scenarios where Eastwood delivered one of his trademark lines to Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. "Go ahead, make my day." Audiences laughed, but beneath the humor lay a deeper unease. Even Dirty Harry wasn't immune to controversy. Social media buzzed with opinions. Fans defended Eastwood fiercely, pointing to his decades of philanthropy and support for veterans. "He's done so much good," one commenter wrote. "Why are we punishing him for something that happened years ago?" Critics, however, saw things differently. "Fame doesn't give you a free pass," another argued. "If regular people can face consequences for negligence, why should celebrities get special treatment?" Meanwhile, Pam Bondi remained steadfast in her pursuit of justice, or so she claimed. She appeared on multiple news programs, defending her decision to pursue charges against Eastwood. "This isn't about fame or status," she said repeatedly. "It's about holding people accountable no matter who they are." Yet skepticism lingered. Political analysts noted that Bondi's aggressive stance coincided with rumors of a potential Senate run. Was she genuinely seeking justice, or was this a calculated move to boost her profile? No one could say for sure, but the timing certainly raised eyebrows. For Eastwood, the mounting scrutiny took a toll. Friends close to him described him as frustrated but determined. He spent hours reviewing documents with his legal team, poring over every detail in search of answers. Despite the stress, he refused to let the situation consume him entirely. Instead, he channeled his energy into preparing for the trial. "He knows what's at stake," one insider revealed. "This isn't just about proving his innocence, it's about protecting everything he's built." Behind closed doors, Eastwood reflected on the irony of it all. Here he was, a man who had spent his career portraying strong, morally upright characters, now facing accusations of negligence in real life. It was almost poetic in a cruel way. Yet despite the pressure, he remained calm. Those who knew him best said he approached the situation like he did everything else, with quiet determination. He wasn't going to let this break him. As the trial date drew closer, new evidence emerged that added layers of complexity to the case. A whistleblower came forward, claiming they had witnessed misconduct within the charity years earlier. Their testimony implicated several high-ranking officials but stopped short of directly accusing Eastwood. Defense attorneys seized on this, arguing that it proved their client wasn't the mastermind behind the alleged mismanagement. Prosecutors, however, dismissed the claims as irrelevant, insisting that Eastwood still bore ultimate responsibility. Public opinion remained divided. Some viewed Bondi as a crusader for accountability, while others accused her of grandstanding. Eastwood's supporters rallied around him, organizing fundraisers and social media campaigns to show solidarity. Critics doubled down on their accusations, questioning whether fame shielded him from consequences. Through it all, Eastwood stayed silent, letting his actions speak for themselves. In the weeks leading up to the trial, tensions reached a fever pitch. Both sides prepared their arguments, knowing the outcome would have far-reaching implications. For Eastwood, it wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about preserving the image he'd worked so hard to create. For Bondi, It was about proving that even the most untouchable figures could be held accountable. And for the public, it was about figuring out where truth ended and speculation began. One thing was certain. When the trial finally began, all eyes would be on Clint Eastwood. Would he emerge victorious, reaffirming his place as a hero both on and off screen? Or would this chapter rewrite his story forever? Only time would tell. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a test of character, resilience, and the enduring complexities of human frailty. As the trial date approached, the world seemed to hold its breath. The case against Clint Eastwood had become more than just a legal battle. It was now a spectacle, a story that everyone wanted to weigh in on. From living rooms to coffee shops, from late-night talk shows to social media feeds, people couldn't stop talking about it. The media circus surrounding the trial grew louder and more chaotic with each passing day, turning what should have been a straightforward court proceeding into something resembling a cultural phenomenon. The courtroom itself was packed long before proceedings began. Reporters jostled for seats, their notebooks and recording devices at the ready. Fans of Eastwood held up signs outside, some praising his contributions to veterans' causes, others demanding accountability. Protesters gathered too, carrying banners with slogans like "Justice for Veterans" and "No one is above the law." It felt less like a trial and more like a stage production, complete with drama, tension, and an audience eager for resolution. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but formal. The judge sat sternly at the front of the room, flanked by clerks and bailiffs. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispering strategies to one another. And there, sitting quietly beside his defense team, was Clint Eastwood, dressed in a dark suit. He looked every bit the dignified figure fans had come to admire over decades. His face remained calm, almost expressionless, as if he'd already accepted whatever fate awaited him. Yet those who knew him well said he wasn't detached. He was focused, determined to prove his side of the story. The prosecution opened strong, laying out their case with precision. They presented emails, financial records, and testimonies from former employees of the charity. Each piece of evidence was carefully framed to paint Eastwood as someone who had ignored red flags and failed to act when it mattered most. He had a duty to ensure transparency, the lead prosecutor argued passionately. Instead, he chose convenience over accountability. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came in the form of an email chain. In it, a mid-level employee repeatedly warned Eastwood about discrepancies in how funds were being allocated. According to the prosecution, Eastwood's response, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. "This isn't negligence," the prosecutor declared. "This is willful disregard." Eastwood's defense team countered with equal fervor. Alan Dershowitz took center stage, his voice steady and commanding as he dismantled the prosecution's arguments point by point. He reminded the jury that Eastwood hadn't been actively involved in the charity's operations for years, delegating those responsibilities to trusted individuals. "You don't punish someone for trusting others to do their jobs," Dershowitz said. "That's leadership, not negligence." To bolster their case, the defense called witnesses who spoke highly of Eastwood's character. A retired Marine veteran recounted how Eastwood had personally helped fund medical treatments for wounded soldiers. Another witness, a longtime friend, described him as someone who always put others first, especially those who served their country. These stories humanized Eastwood, reminding everyone in the room, and watching from home, that this wasn't just a celebrity on trial. It was a man with a lifetime of good deeds behind him, but the prosecution wasn't backing down. They brought in their own witnesses, including the whistleblower who claimed to have seen misconduct firsthand. This person described instances where money meant for veterans was funneled into questionable projects, such as luxury retreats for board members. While they stopped short of directly implicating Eastwood, their testimony cast doubt on his oversight, or lack thereof. Throughout it all, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi remained a constant presence. She attended nearly every hearing, sitting quietly in the gallery but making her intentions clear. To some, her involvement signaled commitment to justice. To others, It reeked of opportunism. Critics accused her of using the high-profile case to boost her political ambitions, pointing to leaked memos suggesting her office had expedited the investigation to coincide with her rumored Senate campaign. Supporters, however, praised her tenacity, calling her a champion for accountability. Outside the courtroom, the debate raged on. Late-night hosts joked about Eastwood's predicament, imagining scenarios where he delivered one-liners to Bondi during cross-examination. Talk shows invited experts to dissect the case, debating whether fame insulated individuals from consequences or made them more vulnerable to public scrutiny. Social media exploded with memes and hashtags, some supporting Eastwood, others condemning him. The divide was stark, reflecting broader societal tensions about privilege, responsibility, and fairness. Documentaries added fuel to the fire, offering differing perspectives on the scandal. One film portrayed Eastwood as a victim of circumstance, a well-meaning figurehead caught in a bureaucratic nightmare. Another painted him as complicit, suggesting his silence amounted to negligence. Both narratives gained traction, further polarizing public opinion. For Eastwood, the constant attention was exhausting. Friends close to him revealed that he rarely watched the news or scrolled through social media these days. Instead, he focused on preparing for court, working closely with his legal team to craft a defense rooted in truth and integrity. Despite the pressure, he maintained his composure, refusing to let anger or frustration get the better of him. "If you know Clint," one insider said, "you know he doesn't shy away from a fight, but he fights fair." As the trial wore on, moments of levity occasionally broke the tension. During one particularly heated exchange between lawyers, Eastwood leaned over to Dershowitz and whispered something that made them both chuckle softly. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about his resilience. Even in the eye of the storm, he found ways to stay grounded. By the time closing arguments rolled around, emotions were running high. The prosecution urged the jury to see beyond Eastwood's celebrity status, emphasizing the importance of holding powerful figures accountable. "This isn't about Dirty Harry or any movie role," the lead prosecutor said. "It's about doing what's right." Dershowitz, meanwhile, appealed to the jury's sense of fairness. "Clint Eastwood is not perfect," he admitted, "but neither are any of us. What we're asking you to consider is whether mistakes, real or perceived, should overshadow a lifetime of service." When the final verdict was announced, the courtroom fell silent. For Eastwood, it marked the end of a grueling chapter, but also the beginning of a new one. Whether vindicated or convicted, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Public perception doesn't change overnight, and rebuilding trust takes time. As he walked out of the courthouse surrounded by reporters, Eastwood paused briefly to address the crowd. With a faint smile, he said simply, "I've always tried to do right by people. If I fell short, I apologized, not just to those involved, but to everyone who believed in me." Then, without another word, he climbed into a waiting car and drove away, leaving behind a nation still divided over what had transpired. Little did anyone know, this wasn't the end of Clint Eastwood's story. It was merely a turning point. How history would remember him depended not on the verdict alone, but on how he chose to move forward. And knowing Eastwood, he wasn't about to let this define him. The courtroom was silent when the foreman of the jury stood up to deliver the verdict. Everyone leaned forward, holding their breath. For Clint Eastwood, this moment felt like it had been years in the making, though in reality, it had only taken weeks. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Cameras rolled silently. And even Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi seemed unusually still, as she waited for the words that would determine the fate of one of Hollywood's most iconic figures. "Not guilty on major charges," the foreman announced, his voice steady but clear. There was an audible gasp from the crowd. Some people clapped quietly while others shook their heads in disbelief. But the relief on Eastwood's face was unmistakable. It wasn't triumph. He didn't raise his fists in victory or flash a wide grin, but rather a quiet sense of vindication. He'd spent months fighting to prove his innocence, and now, at least partially, he'd succeeded. However, the jury wasn't done yet. guilty of negligence regarding financial oversight, the foreman continued. This time the room erupted into murmurs. Eastwood's shoulders sagged slightly, but he remained composed. His lawyers exchanged glances, partly relieved, partly frustrated. They'd hoped for a full acquittal, but this outcome was better than nothing. It meant no jail. Time, just community service and restitution payments to veterans groups affected by the charity scandal. Still, it stung. Even partial guilt carried weight, especially for someone whose reputation was built on integrity. When the judge handed down the sentence, there was a mix of leniency and accountability. Eastwood wouldn't serve prison time, but he'd need to dedicate hundreds of hours to community service, working directly with veterans organizations. He'd also pay back a significant portion of the mismanaged funds personally, ensuring those who depended on the charity wouldn't be left empty-handed. To some, this punishment felt fair, a way to hold him accountable without destroying his life. To others, it seemed too light, especially given the millions allegedly mishandled. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as Eastwood stepped out into the sunlight. Cameras flashed non-stop, capturing every step he took. This time, though, he didn't rush away. Instead, he stopped at the bottom of the steps and turned to face the crowd. With a faint smile, he said simply, "I've always tried to do right by people. If I fell short, I apologize. Not just to those involved, but to everyone who believed in me." It was a rare public statement, delivered not with anger or defensiveness, but with genuine humility. Eastwood didn't try to shift blame or make excuses. He acknowledged his mistakes, or at least the perception of them, and vowed to do better moving forward. For many, it was exactly what they needed to hear. It reminded them that even heroes could stumble, but true strength came from owning up to those missteps and learning from them. In the days following the trial, reactions poured in from all sides. Veterans advocates praised Eastwood's commitment to restitution, calling it a step toward healing. Fans celebrated his partial vindication, saying it proved you couldn't keep a legend down. Critics, however, argued that the verdict didn't go far enough, accusing the system of letting him off easy because of his fame. Social media exploded once again, with hashtags like #IBAR Justice for Veterans trending alongside #Dar Eastwood Vindicated. The debate raged on, reflecting broader societal tensions about power, privilege, and accountability. For Eastwood, the aftermath was bittersweet. On one hand, he'd avoided the worst-case scenario, a criminal record and potential jail time. On the other, the damage to his legacy lingered. Decades of hard work and goodwill hadn't disappeared overnight, but cracks had formed. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. And Eastwood knew that actions spoke louder than words. So instead of retreating into obscurity, he threw himself into fulfilling his sentence. He began volunteering regularly at veterans centers across California, rolling up his sleeves and doing whatever was needed. Whether it was serving meals, organizing events, or simply sitting down to listen to stories, he approached each task with the same quiet determination he'd shown throughout the trial. Slowly but surely, he started earning back the trust he'd lost. Veterans who initially doubted his sincerity warmed up to him, seeing firsthand how much he cared. One elderly veteran summed it up perfectly after sharing lunch with Eastwood. "He may have made mistakes, but he's here now, trying to make things right. That counts for something." Meanwhile, Pam Bondi faced her own reckoning. While some hailed her as a crusader for justice, others accused her of exploiting the case for political gain. Leaked emails suggested her office had rushed the investigation to coincide with her rumored Senate campaign, fueling accusations of opportunism. When asked about it during interviews, Bondi maintained that her motives were pure. This was never about politics, she insisted. It was about holding people accountable. Yet skepticism persisted, casting a shadow over her career aspirations. As months passed, Eastwood returned to what he did best: storytelling. Inspired by his ordeal, he began working on a new film, a gritty drama about a flawed hero grappling with redemption in an unforgiving world. The parallels between the character and his own journey weren't lost on anyone. Filming took place in rural locations far from the chaos of Los Angeles, allowing Eastwood to focus on crafting a narrative that resonated deeply with audiences. Early screenings garnered rave reviews, with critics praising its raw honesty and emotional depth. By the time the movie hit theaters, public opinion about Eastwood had shifted noticeably. People admired his resilience, his willingness to confront his flaws head-on, and his dedication to making amends. Sure, the controversy hadn't vanished entirely, but it had softened. What remained was a portrait of a man who, despite his age and accomplishments, still believed in growth and second chances. Looking back, Eastwood saw the trial as both a challenge and a turning point. It forced him to reflect on his life, his choices, and the responsibilities that came with influence. In a way, it humanized him, stripping away the larger-than-life persona and revealing the man beneath. For someone who'd spent decades playing unshakable characters on screen, this experience taught him something invaluable. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. Years later, when historians wrote about Clint Eastwood, they wouldn't gloss over the charity scandal or the trial that followed, but they'd also note how he handled it, with grace, accountability, and a relentless drive to improve. Because in the end, his story wasn't just about falling, it was about rising again, and that, perhaps more than anything else, cemented his place not just as a Hollywood icon, but as a testament to the enduring power of redemption.